Hey everyone, welcome to another video. In this video we're going to discuss an interesting idea of the ancient philosopher Plato. We will be analyzing his allegory of the cave. So the allegory of the cave can be found in Plato's book called The Republic. I've read this book for the first time when I was in high school, which is at least more than 10 years ago. And although I didn't really understand most of the ideas that Plato was writing about back then, the idea of this cave, I still remember it up to this day, and it really left an interesting impression upon me. Plato used this idea of the cave to indicate that the reality which we humans perceive to be real is in fact only a projection. And according to Plato, the real truth is hidden from humanity because we are kind of stuck in a cave. Plato wrote, "I want you to go on to picture the enlightenment or ignorance of a human condition somewhat as follows. Imagine an underground chamber like a cave. In this chamber are men who have been prisoners there since they were children, their legs and necks being so fastened that they can only look straight ahead of them and cannot turn their heads. As a result, these prisoners would then only be able to look at a wall in front of them, upon which, as a result of a fire burning inside of the cave and all sorts of things happening between the prisoners and the fire, all sorts of projections would form. And although all kinds of things are happening around them, and despite of being fellow prisoners inside of this cave, these prisoners would, according to Plato, only be able to perceive these projections upon the wall." And I think this picture shows it quite clearly. So you can see the prisoners here sitting on the left, and they are looking at this wall with the projections that are being made by these people that are walking around this road, and also because of this fire that's kind of behind the prisoners and behind these people that are making the projections. And as such, although these people are doing all kinds of things, perhaps they're even talking to each other, the prisoners will think that all the sounds and all the things that they see are actually coming from this projection. Plato wrote in relation to these prisoners, "They are drawn from life," I replied. "For tell me, do you think our prisoners could see anything of themselves or their fellows except the shadows thrown by the fire on the wall of the cave opposite them?" Such as we've seen in the pictures, for the prisoners the only true reality would be the one projected upon the wall. So Plato wrote, "In every way they would believe that the shadows of the objects we mentioned were the whole truth." Then the only way for the prisoners to discover the real truth would be for them to actually leave the cave. Plato, however, argued that the prisoners would not be inclined to do so voluntarily, because Plato believed that if a prisoner would turn his head and look around the cave, or would actually leave the cave, then the fire and the light from the outside world would hurt his eyes to such a degree that it would be impossible for the prisoner to see clearly. This is of course the case because the prisoner is only used to the darkness within the cave. So then even if he would look straight at the truth, he would not be able to see it clearly. So Plato wrote, "And if he were made to look directly at the light of the fire, it would hurt his eyes and he would turn back and retreat to the things which he could see properly, which he would think really clearer than the things being shown him." So in this sense, the only way for a prisoner to actually leave the case would be if he would be forced to leave the case. So if he had no other choice but to become accustomed to the light outside, then the prisoner would eventually conclude that the things he previously considered to be the only true reality were in fact mere projections. And as a result of this newfound wisdom, Plato argued that the prisoner would actually likely decide not to return back to the cave. So he wrote, "It won't be surprising if those who get so far are unwilling to involve themselves in human affairs, and if their minds long to remain in the realm above." And even if a prisoner would still decide to return, then Plato believed that the other prisoners would not really be tempted to listen to the returning prisoner, because upon his return, the returning prisoner would make a fool out of himself, because him being accustomed to the outside light, the prisoner would at first not be able to see the shadows clearly within the cave. And as a result, Plato argued that the people that remained in the cave, they would say that his visit to the upper world had ruined his sight, and that the ascent was not worth even attempting. And if anyone tried to release them and lead them up, they would kill him if they could lay hands on him. So according to Plato, this metaphor of the cave has several implications in the sense that we can apply it in our real world. Plato argued, for example, that it would mean that we should rethink education. So he wrote, "We must reject the conception of education professed by those who say that they can put into the minds knowledge that was not there before, rather as if they could put sight into blind eyes." Instead, Plato indicated that education is best aimed at training the eye to be able to look directly at the light of reality, for which the entire mind must be turned. Plato wrote, "Then this turning around of the mind itself might be made a subject of professional skill, which would effect the conversion as easily and effectively as possible. It would not be concerned to implant sight, but to ensure that someone who had it already was not either turned in the wrong direction or looking the wrong way." In this sense, the problem, according to Plato, is not that these prisoners cannot see clearly, it's that they are looking in the wrong direction. And education should be aimed at making these prisoners turn around their mind. And secondly, another implication of this allegory of the cave is that, according to Plato, the government should compel those who have managed to leave the cave to actually share their knowledge with the entire community. And although the escaped prisoner might not want to do so, he should be compelled to share his new knowledge because it will benefit the entire community. Plato wrote that it uses persuasion or compulsion to unite all citizens and make them share together the benefits which each individually can confer on the community. And its purpose in fostering this attitude is not to leave everyone to please himself, but to make each man a link in the unity of the whole. And in fact, Plato even argued that these prisoners that have escaped, whom he calls philosophers, should actually govern society, because they, having seen the light, will eventually also be able to understand the shadow world a lot better. Plato wrote, "You must therefore each descend in turn and live with your fellows in the cave and get used to seeing in the dark. Once you get used to it, you will see 1,000 times better than they do and will distinguish the various shadows and know what they are shadows of, because you have seen the truth about things admirable and just and good." And even though, as I mentioned before, these prisoners, they might prefer to stay in the realm above, however, according to Plato, this is exactly what will make them good politicians as well. He wrote, "The truth is quite different. The state whose prospective rulers come to their duties with least enthusiasm is bound to have the best and most tranquil government, and the state whose rulers are eager to rule, the worst." I believe that the allegory of the cave is a rather complex metaphor because it can be interpreted in many different ways. I believe, however, that there are two important conclusions that we can derive from this allegory, especially in relation to our current society. So the first conclusion is that we humans are in several ways blind to the truth, and that we do not really possess the capability to transcend this blindness. This is the case because any attempt to look away from the shadow projections will be extremely painful and difficult. I believe that if we keep this idea of Plato in mind, then we might remember not to look away when the light kind of blinds us, because this is only a necessary part of transcending the shadow world. And I think that the second conclusion that we can draw is that those that have managed to ascend to the realm above should actually be the ones leading our society, because they will then be able to share their knowledge, and also because their disinterest in human affairs is actually what will make them the least corrupt. I think with this idea in mind, we should remember to carefully listen to those that claim to have found a new truth. Because of our blindness, we might be tempted to make a fool out of them, even though they might actually be right. And lastly, Plato wrote, "And so our state and yours will be really awake and not merely dreaming like most societies today, with their shadow battles and their struggles for power." So thank you very much for watching. If you have derived any other interesting conclusions from this allegory of the cave, then please let me know. If you like these kind of videos, then please also subscribe to this channel. I try to make a new video at least every week about a different idea or different author. If you have any suggestions about a book or an author or an idea for me to discuss, then also please let me know in the comments. So thank you again and hope to see you in the next video.